behavior. What does it mean to be black in America from a psycho-historical perspective? It's important for blacks in America to know history. That history includes the history of enslavement in Africa, of colonization, later of segregation in the United States. My own studies as a psychologist of the use of the history have shown that this enslavement had more than one part to it. There was a physical enslavement, but the only way that physical enslavement would work is that the mind also had to be enslaved.
It's really exciting and really a pleasure to be doing this. There really are not words for it. And I am so thankful. Thank you for coming and sharing this experience with me. This dissertation for me really has been, people use the word life-changing and those kinds of terms, and that's really not an exaggeration for me. Because it's autoethnography, and I'll talk more about that, there is a way that I have been able to make meaning of my life experiences in education and as an educator in a way that I could not have had I not done this dissertation, because it really provided me with a funnel for all those experiences. And it ended up in many ways being not what I expected, which to me says it was good data and good dissertation, because I ended up saying things and thinking things and finding literature that matched those things and did not match those things in ways I could not have imagined. So I feel very proud of it, and I wanted to be able to come to this point and believe that what I had done had integrity, been in line with who I am, and felt like it was a genuine contribution to the literature. So I'm very pleased. My perspective in the world is that God and the ancestors are present with me, and I'll see if I can get through this whole thing without breaking up. And also that my parents who transitioned many, many years ago when I was in my 20s, that they are aware of this weekend. And I have missed them tremendously in the last 2 weeks as I've gone about thinking about being done. And so this is certainly to honor them in also ways I couldn't say. So the title of my dissertation is Educator and Educated. Again, it's an autoethnography illuminating race and racism in U.S. public schools. I'm starting off with this slide and this next piece because I think very often when we talk about any kind of oppression, or certainly as we talk about racism, if it's not really highly participatory in particular, people just kind of go in and say, okay, now we're going to talk about race. We're going to talk about 400 years of oppression, but I'm really not inviting you to set up what that is for you internally. And so anytime I present in my work as a social justice facilitator, I have some kind of norms for time together, which is really about getting folks in contact with what happens for them when these topics are discussed. Even if they were never going to turn to another person and say anything about it, it's, if nothing else, an internal check to support learning. So the norms that I increasingly use more than any other are Singleton and Lenton's from Courageous Conversations About Race. And because they move out of, on some level, the more conventional norms, and the more conventional norms are very often contextualized in white mainstream ways of being in the world and epistemology. So these say stay engaged, speak your truth, experience discomfort, and expect and accept non-closure. So again, I would invite you to, as I go through this dissertation and as we learn together, to think about these norms and check in with yourself about what is going on for you during the time this next hour and a half goes. Goals for my dissertation, as I've looked at them and consolidated them, I should say the impetus, I'm sorry, I got one slide here. So the impetus for this study is, first of all, my African American lived experience and the meaning I've made of that. And that is, in many ways, I put it first because it's foundational. The other impetus is my work as an educator. So I walked into the classroom as a teacher for the first time over 30 years ago. I was 22 years old. And more recently, I've worked with educators on social justice in the last 10 years in particular, and now I have my own social justice nonprofit. So that is certainly another part of what was behind my going in this direction for this dissertation. The other is Brown versus the Board of Education as a background and a foreground throughout my life. In 2004, the Brown Supreme Court decision had its 50th anniversary. And that decision was 1954 and then 1955. I'm going to talk just a little bit more about that. But I was born in 1957. So that means literally, Brown has impacted my life in powerful ways during my entire life. And right up to the moment, to the present moment, as I continue to work with educators. So Brown is definitely a huge piece of what moved me in the direction for this particular dissertation. And then my doctoral studies, because my doctoral studies put me in contact with theories and research that grounded my life experience. So I went into my doctoral program certainly knowing what Brown was and thinking about Brown and thinking about all those things. And yet, when I went into my doctoral studies and began to get a critical lens on these events, it really shifted for me my thinking and really supported me in, again, making sense of, so that's what I've been seeing and that's what that means. And now I have terminology for it, and that's really huge. So these things come together. They came together to make me say to myself, so this is what this dissertation needs to be, and we'll hear more about that. So the goals are to contribute to the placing of voices of marginalized people in the literature. Delgado, Sherrell, and Taylor, many folks have critical race theory as their Brownian position talk about that is how important it is to have voices of marginalized people in the literature. So certainly that is a major goal of mine in terms of this study. Told in a space for counter stories of African Americans who experience this institutional phenomenon I'm talking about, which is desegregation, what happened with Brown. And not the mainstream story, but the story of people who lived the experience and were most impacted by it. And that is, I was one of those individuals. I am one of those individuals as an African American. And then to support a deeper understanding of the history and the current realities of racism in U.S. educational institutions, that then results in action for development and implementation of more equitable policies, practices, and procedures. So those are the goals. This is autoethnography, and that is the most interesting part of this for me. So, the elevator talk, I have 30 seconds to talk to you. What's your dissertation about? So I say it's autoethnography. So auto being self, and then ethnography as a study of culture, of the lives of groups and organizations in society. And so what I usually have gotten from people is, so you're doing autobiography for your dissertation, isn't that cute? It's really the background. And so then I talked about how autoethnography this is my personal experience, but it also is contextualized, and it's based in looking at culture and socio-political realities of U.S. education. And that's where it makes a tremendous difference. And as I did the dissertation, I became more and more aware of how that's true. I was struck by how the writing I did for my dissertation is some of the most personal writing I've ever done. And yet, for me, there is a quality about it not being personal, because it is so institutionally based. I found so much in the literature, and I over and over again said, oh, that wasn't just family learning that I got. I didn't have that experience just because I'm Carla, whatever makes it unique. But I got this an experience that is hundreds of years old. And this dissertation really gave me an opportunity to really look at that and see what are the institutional learnings that are based in the realities of racism over hundreds of years in the United States that come and knock on my door every day as an educator. And that is for me what makes it deeply about autoethnography rather than autobiography. I'm going to move back and forth to find some specific reasons. So one of the major, I guess, founders, if you will, of autoethnography is Alice and her husband, Basha. And one of the things they talked about is that autoethnography rests in, that the enthusiasm for it was grounded in and instigated by a desire to move ethnography away from the gaze of the distant and detached observer and toward the embrace of intimate involvement, engagement, and embodied participation. So again, also looking, and I think it's very much, again, about the history of oppression and really looking at how the academy and how research has been grounded in oppression, that this business of I'm an observer, and the experience that comes up for me around that is I'm a fly and I'm under glass and you're looking at me and you're examining me and you're interpreting my life, and therefore that I become absolutely objectified. And so autoethnography, and I think one reason Ellis went this direction is because she's a woman in the academy. And so she was, from a feminist point of view, she got very involved in this. So that's autoethnography. Not an exaggeration. The most crucial part of my learning at Fielding has been critical race theory. It just hands down. And again, I think for me, it's because it gave me content, terminology, and it so resonated for me. And I said in my dissertation, when I first learned about critical race theory, it was like I had gotten a new infusion of oxygen. I could breathe. Because I looked at it and said, oh, this explains what I've been seeing. This explains the way the world works. And first of all, somebody else thought about it, which felt really good. And it was so detailed. So the tenets of critical race theory make about as much sense to me as anything ever has, to the point where I think I get it that it's a theory, but when I talk about it, it's like, well, here's the way the world works as I know it as an African American, and as the world and the meaning I make of that has been passed down to me. So these are the tenets. That society has an acceptance of racism as ordinary. It's not unusual, it's just the way the world is. That there is this process whereby white people allow black people and other people who are marginalized to progress when it also promotes their interest convergence. And this is a huge part, as I talk about Brown, I recently did a presentation, and a woman came up to me very brave, a white woman, and said, are you saying Brown was an awful thing? And I said, I appreciate the question, because I always say that this is not about good or bad. This is not about saying, like, first of all, I have hindsight, and folks who worked on Brown and created the conditions for that decision they did not have the benefits of hindsight, even though some folks did talk about what was going to happen, like Du Bois, and I'll talk about that some. But what Brown is a classic example of interest convergence. And the court decision that was wonderful, and I always say I would love to have been in the room celebrating after that first decision came down in 1954. So black folks must have been seriously on the hilltop. And I wish I'd been there. And critical race theory basically for me means that the way the society is set up, institutions will always find a way to keep racism moving, to keep it grounded, to keep power in place. And so that is interest convergence. And that's what I think about Brown, is that it's a classic example.
And we must come to understand what a racist society is about. We use that term so often without analyzing it very well. And we must recognize essentially then that a racist society is about structuring social and political, economic circumstances, psychological and cultural circumstances, such that one race can take advantage of another, and one race can enhance itself at the expense of another. It has little to do with overt